Welcome! Time for another episode of Vibes of the Universe. Like always, I'll start with the recent geomagnetic activities. During the day of March 7, ground magnetometers over Northern Hemisphere recorded two different events. First took place around 8 UTC, while second one soon after 21st UTC. In Northern Europe, second disturbance was stronger than the previous one, which was recorded mostly in the station placed further north. For example, in Kiruna, first geomagnetic pulse was barely visible, but even the second jolt was rather weak and didn't manage to cause any visible auroras. In Canada, geomagnetic activities affected the readings in opposite way. Jolt from the morning was the stronger one and was recorded mostly at lower latitudes. Second impulse was felt in station placed closer to the polar cap. ACE readings show that BZ was turned north, what shouldn't cause any disturbances. On plasma parameters graph, there is nothing suspicious neither. Only the temperature of solar wind became more stable at this period of time. Let's speak a bit about the oxygen and its ions. It wasn't so long ago when I've noticed that atomic oxygen, which is one of the main components of ionosphere, started to behave in quite uncommon way. This is how the images of atomic oxygen looked like during all the years which I've spent on watching space weather monitors. And this is how it looks like today. Notice the difference in density of particles. Amount of oxygen atoms at a high altitudes dropped by around 25% in last couple months. Here we can see how the main concentration of atomic oxygen moves from the day side of Earth, where it should stay all the time, to the shaded part of planet. This event took place around February 25. Around the same time, Earth was passing through a sector boundary, and because I've noticed that those events were very often connected with the ionospheric anomalies, I've made a guess that disturbances of ionosphere can be connected with changing polarity of IMF. I was wrong. In the beginning of March, Earth returned to a positive sector of heliosphere. Problem is that during this time behavior of atomic oxygen didn't change a bit. It means that the magnetic polarity of IMF is not the factor which is causing those disturbances in ionosphere. However, according to Van Allen satellites, the rate of atomic oxygen outflow grew visibly soon after the IMF polarity flipped. It could be caused by increased space weather activity. However, according to SWPC, Kp index was rather low during this time. It wasn't hard to notice that the decreasing density of atomic oxygen in the ionosphere is always connected with significant drop of neutral gas temperature by around 300 kelvins. But it seems that ionospheric plasma is during this time colder than normal as well. So, it seems that now I will have to search for another possible cause of this disturbance. But I will wait with it till the next change of atomic oxygen behavior. Because now I would like to change the subject and speak a little bit about the weather. In my previous movie, I've made a small forecast using my theory of electromagnetic atmosphere. I've predicted high possibility of tropical storm formation close to Fiji Islands. Of course, just by one of those famous coincidences, less than a week after I published last movie, a tropical storm named Pam appeared right at the spot. On mimic animation, we can see nicely that soon before the storm started to form, atmospheric water was clearly moving eastward, opposite to natural weather patterns. But while we're looking at those images, check out the disturbances recorded during last couple days. This pulse was quite spectacular. I've got the strange feeling that weather patterns over Western Pacific have something to do with events which can be seen on ionospheric plasma temperature monitor. But in different parts of the globe, things are getting crazy as well. Notice, for example, this counterclockwise spinning air mass in the middle of Mediterranean Sea. It is the result of atmospheric reconnection, which I was explaining last time, and seems to be stationary. But things are getting interesting when we compare those images with the air pressure map. Because right in the middle of this system, pressure is pretty high, 1020 hectopascals. However, other disturbances of weather patterns make me even more worried, like the size of magnetic connections between polar caps and the equator, which I've marked for you in red color. One of those enormous field lines managed to connect Central Pacific with Northern Atlantic. Other one, which appeared soon later, connected Brazil with Mediterranean Sea. Another connection is stretching itself over bigger part of Northern Pacific. In last couple days, another example of those mutant flux tubes was visible over Southern Atlantic, where it was connecting Brazil with Southern Polar Vortex. However, during last hours, connection seems to lose its stability. I think that I can make now a small guess and tell that those anomalies are connected with a process which I pointed out in last movie. The split of Northern Polar Vortex. As I said last time, we have now two separate spinning Arctic air masses. One is placed over northern Canada and second in Northeast Asia. Air currents at highest levels of atmosphere circulate between both centers, what is causing a clear deformation of polar vortex, which is now elliptical rather than circular. But check out the forecast for another week or so. Notice how rapid are the changes of polar vortex motion and the center of its rotation. Time will tell if this prediction was correct, but now I need to show you the jet stream. First, I need to show you something what at the first sight might look like something completely insignificant. However, I have the feeling that this tiny event can be an introduction for greater changes. Look in what direction this air mass is moving. For those who don't know anything about air circulation in the atmosphere, over northern hemisphere rotation of air masses should be directed clockwise. But there is much more going on right now. I'm not sure if it is caused by the deformation of polar vortex or by the atmospheric reconnections, but over northern hemisphere jet stream turned into a giant spiral connecting northern Brazil with Iceland. I'm not a weather specialist, but I don't think that it should look like this. According to the forecast, on March 16th, jet stream will cross the equator and connect both hemispheres over the Pacific. There is not too many scientists who are not afraid to speak officially about the connection between polar vortex and geomagnetic field. In social media, everyone's blaming environment pollution. Those images show perfectly that in the north there are two magnetic poles, what is causing visible disturbances of air circulation. Problem is that those images are not valid any longer. Since the beginning of 2015, things started to change faster than before, and I think that the main polarities of magnetic field over northern hemisphere are right now placed in different locations than in 2010. By looking at the behavior of polar air masses, we can guess what is the angle of geomagnetic field orientation and how big is the tilt of X and Y magnetic components. But to show you the disturbances of Z geomagnetic component, I need to go back to the polar vortex forecast. Take a look at the last images. If you know the basics of astrophysics, you should be able to recognize this pattern. You really don't need to be a genius to notice couple similarities between those images. This is of course the Z component, north-south orientation. Problem is that here Z magnetic axis is tilted by 90 degrees. Magnetic poles would have to be placed on the equator to match this prediction. Of course, just by coincidence, I predicted more than a year ago that Earth's magnetic dipole axis will become perpendicular to its current placement in the future. However, I'm not able to say if this forecast is correct. To finish the electromagnetic weather subject with a loud boom, let's look once more at Australia and Western Pacific. It seems that the reality is much more grim than my pseudo-scientific doomsday predictions. In my last movies I've told couple times that situation in this part of the world might become rough in the near future. But even in my wildest dreams I didn't expect that weather will become so extreme as it is now. Currently there are 4 different tropical storms over Western Pacific. Pam grew much bigger and stronger. Right now it is a category 5 cyclone, the strongest one. 2 level 1 cyclones appeared closer to Australia, and there is a chance that they will make a simultaneous landfall for the second time in history. 4th tropical storm is placed on the second side of equator. But better just look at satellite imagery. Pam is a monster. It's almost as big as Australia. On Mimic Total Perceptible Water animation, we can watch how all 4 cyclones formed themselves during last days. It seems that everything is caused by this stationary Arctic low pressure system, which appeared in the middle of Northern Pacific couple days earlier. I've said many times about one of the main rules of electromagnetism. Magnetic connection is possible only between currents with the same flow direction. This is why Pam seemed to be connected with the stationary polar air mass. Another field line connects the polar low pressure system with southern part of South America. Over the northern hemisphere, situation was similar only in the beginning. Soon after storms started to form on the opposite side of equator, connection with the polar vortex was cut out. Then things started to go even worse, as the field line managed to cross the equatorial belt and connect north polar vortex with southern jet stream. Let's look closer at Bavi, tropical storm which formed north from the equator. According to the modeled weather monitors, this system is generally powered by high pressure from the northeast. And this is why I trust only actual satellite images. Here we can see clearly that a field line is connecting Bavi with north polar vortex. Bigger field line in the east managed already to establish a connection with PAM. It has already started to cause counterclockwise motion over the southern hemisphere. Not so long ago, I've said that all those weather anomalies can be tracked or even predicted using the monitors of ionosphere. Time to confront this claim with the reality. Those images show the height of F2 layer. Red color means that particles in this area are placed higher than other ones. Dark blue shows the regions where ionospheric plasma is being pushed down closer to the surface. Let's see if there were any suspicious activities over Western Pacific. It seems that during the night time ionospheric disturbances become stronger than on the day side of our planet. Around the local midnight, ionospheric F2 layer reached the lowest altitude on the whole planet. Notice as well the increased magnetic influence over both day-night boundaries. For the end, let's look at some interesting weather anomalies which took place in last couple days. First, an extreme dust storm in northern Africa. And now, a spectacular collision between air masses over Europe. It is quite a long time since the last time when I've discussed the solar activity in my movies. Some of you started already to ask me about the recent solar flares uptick, and there is actually a lot to talk about. In the beginning of March 9th, we can see a sudden increase of activity on GOES X-ray flux graph. It was caused by the active region with number 2297, which started to pop out flares since it appeared on the Earth-facing disk. The strongest eruption produced by this sunspot group was an X2.1 flare, which was directed only slightly to the side from our planet. Like in most of active regions, which produce the strongest flares during current solar cycle, magnetic polarity of sunspot group 2297 was perpendicular to the equator. In fact, positive central spot was surrounded by negative fields from south and north. But check this out. It seems that there was a simultaneous eruption on the incoming limb together with the X-class solar flare. During the time when region 2297 was facing Earth, it has caused a lot of instabilities in its surrounding. For example, couple hours after the strongest flare, another discharge disrupted the local filaments, but didn't cause their ejection. In my opinion, the last increase of solar activity was caused by a sudden disturbance of heliospheric polarity. On all possible simulations, we can see that around 8 March, South Pole on the Sun became negative again. Although after a couple days negative magnetic polarity disappeared from the North Hemisphere, this event shows clearly that the current solar cycle is still in progress, even if some people say that it is complete. Just like on Earth, Sun is right now going through some serious changes, which are much more significant than the flip of polarity, which is taking place every 11 years. In the case of our star, those changes are even more dramatic and the tripolarity is much more clear than on our planet. Besides all those flares and filament eruptions, space weather conditions were relatively calm. Since 9th of March, solar wind velocity started to drop after coronal hole stream, which arrived 2 days earlier. What is even more important, Earth remained in positive sector of IMF during this period of time. According to ACE readings, the last sector boundary crossing took place on 4th of March, but most of heliosphere simulations show completely different stories. LM Sol Ecliptic View Monitor shows that since 3rd of March IMF polarity remained positive till March 8th. On this day, Earth should pass through the sector boundary and move to a negative part of IMF. Where it should remain till the time when I'm recording this clip. Now let's look at Gong simulation. According to it, IMF became positive in the first day of March. Just like on previous monitor, Earth moved to negative sector on March 8th. So, both simulations generated very similar images, which sadly have nothing to do with reality. Here's the last heliosphere monitor, PFSS simulation, which is available on ISWA. Here, the first crossing of a sector boundary took place on 6th of March, when IMF should become negative. Then, around 4 days later, we should pass again into a positive sector. It seems that there is only one monitor which is quite accurate, Enlil Heliosphere, but in big part it is using ACE satellite readings. On the last image we can see that Earth should be passing to negative IMF sector right at this time. And here we can see that it is correct. I wanted to finish this movie with previous animation, but recent events forced me to delay the upload. I would curse myself if I wouldn't tell anything about recent geomagnetic activity. Ladies and gentlemen, on 17th of March, KP index reached 8 points, what makes it the strongest geomagnetic storm since I've started to deal with space weather. Disturbances were caused by extremely fast coronal hole stream. Velocity jumped from 400 to almost 800 km per second. During the initial impact, BZ magnetic component oscillated between 20 and minus 20 nanoteslas. But it seems that BY component was twice as strong as BX and BZ, and it reached almost 40 nanoteslas. Like all significant geomagnetic storms caused by solar activity, impact from March 17th was recorded on magnetometers over the entire planet. Disturbances were strong. In Canada, the scale was raised to plus minus 700 nanoteslas. I never seen it such big. In Kiruna, the variations of magnetic field magnitude exceeded 1000 nanoteslas. Disturbances were strong enough to cause auroras, which were visible even in Poland. This short time-lapse shows this event. Notice the red color in upper layers of ionosphere. It is connected with atomic oxygen and can be seen only during the strongest activities. Of course, not everything is so clear in the case of the entire event. If we will look closer at the magnetometer readings, we will notice that even if magnetic instabilities were very strong during the entire afternoon, we can easily point out 3 separate pulses which disturbed the magnetic field even stronger. In Europe, first jolt was recorded around 14 UTC, second one around 18 UTC, and the strongest last one just before the midnight. Readings from Canadian magnetometers doesn't differ that much. Here we can see all 3 impacts even better. First 2 of them took place around 4 hours earlier than in Europe. Last jolt took place at the same time in both locations, only here it was weaker than the previous impulse. I can only guess, but I think that it is connected with solar wind magnetic orientation. Different directions of IMF affect different parts of the globe. According to current space weather models, geomagnetic disturbances are caused mainly by negative BZ component, but I think that BY and BX are important as well. On the ionospheric electric potential monitor, we can see how BX and BY components affect the directions of current flow in the ionosphere. For example, those are images which were generated at the time when in Canada magnetometers recorded disturbances reaching 1400 nanoteslas. Notice how big was the differential. Positive charge exceeded 800 kilovolts. There is much more to tell about the biggest geomagnetic storm of current solar cycle, but you will have to wait till the next episode, which hopefully won't be that much delayed. For the end, let's look at the SWMF plus RCM magnetopause position monitor to see the reaction of magnetosphere. Class dismissed. Be safe. Peace.